Today I will talk largely about statistics, basically about uncertainty, and I will try to connect to dynamics within the next 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever number of lectures that Neelima has put me into, but I will get there. Questions. How many of you know how to compute Lyapunov exponents? Compute Lyapunov exponents. Okay. Wait, only about half, roughly. I think there was enough talk about Lyapunov exponents, at least in Nitin's talk. And anyway, so how about Lyapunov vectors? Do you know what is a Lyapunov vector? Okay, how many of you have computed a Lyapunov or Lyapunov vectors ever? Nobody. Okay. How about relation of Lyapunov exponents to uncertainty? How are Lyapunov exponents connected to uncertainty in dynamical systems? How many of you have seen that connection? None. Okay. Quantify uncertainty by probability distributions. I don't know of any other way of quantifying uncertainty, or some statistic of a probability distribution, or actually probability distribution themselves. So how are Lyapunov exponents and Lyapunov vectors connected to uncertainty will be one part of what I will talk, eventually get there. I'll get there by the end of 3 or 4 lectures. Sorry? No, not exponents. I mean, of course, exponents, yes, but Lyapunov vectors as opposed to Lyapunov exponents. Exponents are numbers, vectors are, well, vectors. Okay, so thank you. Okay, so we will eventually, so that's roughly what I'm trying to get to, which is I'll talk about uncertainty, which is what I'll talk, mostly today will be about uncertainty. And I will then try to connect it to dynamics and dynamics of uncertainty through talking about Lyapunov exponents and Lyapunov vectors over the next 2 to 3 lectures. Would you be able to get laptops and actually do things in person? That is, in some hands-on sessions. I can sort of say share some of these IPython notebooks. I don't have any other language with me right now implemented. Python is what I have. So will that be of interest? For example, on Friday, we could sit together and actually think about how to compute Lyapunov exponents, Lyapunov vectors. Okay, will there be interest in doing that? If yes, please raise your hand. Look, it's after lunch, I know, the tea is coming, and please don't sleep. Or if you sleep, that's fine. But okay, so today will be quite a lot of generalities, not too many specifics. Bear with me. I guess there has not been enough discussion about statistics and uncertainty in this meeting yet. I hope that's what I was trying to bring in. Yeah. Thinking about climate, it's kind of like a two-way street. Understanding climate requires understanding statistical and probabilistic aspects. And in fact, the other way around as well, statistical thinking, in fact, is enriched by problems from climate sciences, right? So climate datasets are extremely rich sources of various types of problems in statistics, many of them not yet completely resolved either, largely because they involve both the spatial and temporal variation. And in fact, it's actually not a good idea to differentiate between spatial and temporal. Really, it should be thought of as a spatio-temporal variation problem. And that's where many of the new topics in statistics are being driven by research in climate sciences. So this is one way. Thinking about climate helps understand problems in statistics, helps give rise to new research areas in statistics, and so on. The other way is that thinking about statistics is absolutely crucial when studying climate. And I will talk about 3 different types of uncertainties, 2 of which have been discussed at length in many different literature. many different types of literature. The third type, which is what I will focus on over the next two, three talks, will be the dynamical aspect. And but in general, thinking about statistics is absolutely crucial. It's very difficult to talk about even climate without talking about statistical aspects of this problem. So it's an integral part, and I feel it's not sufficiently emphasized in discussions about dynamical systems and so on. So what's climate change? How do you define climate change? I'm not going to give you an answer, so I'll just wait here. Think about it for 2 minutes. There is no wrong answer clearly for this problem. As you may see from the last 20 years worth of discussion in newspapers, in scientific articles, in TV channels, and all those places, right? So, okay, so that happens from yesterday to today, to day after, and tomorrow, and so on and so forth. So, is that climate change? That's not climate change. Over the long period of time, that happens, let's say, over past a million years, the Earth's, so to say, parameters have changed. That usually is not termed climate change either. Okay, somebody else. Sorry, let's not focus on one person. Opinions. I'm not asking for answers. Okay, I'm asking for opinions. How about that? Forget answers. Yeah, you're saying something. Example, parameter. I mean, parameter is too general. Okay. Okay. So change in parameters. I guess the commonality almost is that change in parameter, right? Okay. So change in the average value. So there's a slight difference between change of parameters and change of average value of parameters. So that's a slightly more nuanced answer. Anything else? Long-term shifts in temperature, kind of related to this answer, which is long-term shifts in the average temperature. Okay, so I guess one of the things that we see visually or things like that is, for example, something like this, right? You see a picture of where the sea ice was in 1979 and where it is in 2019, and something like the average. Well, again, here is the word average again, the average minimum sea ice, and that change of these aspects is something that is usually associated in some way to what is climate change. This is not still a definition, right? This is just a, to say that, oh, this is because of climate change, maybe. This is the effect of climate change. Is it? Is that, so what's the definition, what's the difference between the effect of something and that thing itself? So is it the effect of climate change or is this climate change? Anyway, retreating glaciers, that's another big problem associated to climate change. Of course, changing global temperature. This is a graph of the average temperature across a seasonal cycle, going from January to December, monthly mean, changing from, the blues are largely in the 1800s and so on, and all the reds are early, recent years. And this trend is pretty dominant. That's a climate. Is that climate change? Is that shift from this curve, the blue curve here, to the red curve here? Is that a climate change effect, or is that climate change? Okay, I'll skip this part for now. And it has a spatio-temporal variability, as I mentioned. The spatial variability is extremely important aspect. That the effect of climate change. So, for example, here the rate of change of rainfall in different parts of India. So this is over grid. I forgot the methods exactly that they use. Essentially, this is using over last about, if I remember correctly, something like last 50 years worth of data set, or maybe 70 years data set. And in different months, the rate of change has different signs in different parts of India. So it's not that the effect is neither spatially nor temporally uniform either. Okay, so I usually like to think of climate change in terms of what is the variability of different variables, temperature, rainfall, sea ice, glaciers, and so on and so forth. And of course, closely associated to that is the uncertainty in it. And pretty much the only mathematical quantitative way of describing uncertainty that we know of is in terms of probability distributions. So at least my placeholder for a definition of climate change is change in the distribution, probability distributions of various variables. Average is only one of the possible aspects of change in a probability distribution. Sometimes you may want to even know about what is, let's say, the variance, the change in the variance. For example, this comes up in talking about extremes. If you are talking of what is, whether the frequency of extremes has changed or not, that is associated not just to a change of average, but also to the change of variability, the variance. In fact, also to the shift of the probability distribution. And so climate change is essentially associated with describing the statistical properties of the system under consideration. And at least I think of climate change purely in terms of a statistical language, and in particular in terms of describing uncertainty, which also describes the variability of a system and so on. So that was my pitch for trying to study statistics, right? Okay, so where does uncertainty enter into picture in the first place? If you have, for example, even if you have a deterministic dynamical system, why do we want to think about uncertainty? Because we have differential equations, you can solve them with as much accuracy as you wish. Why should we think about uncertainty in the first place? So what is the source of uncertainty? So what is it, and how do we describe it? How do we describe it mathematically? And that's what I will talk about today, and then tomorrow we'll see in the context of dynamics how it plays out. Yeah. So various sources of uncertainty, and this need not actually be simply only for climate system. This is very general, right? Biological systems have the same, in some sense, same sources of uncertainty. Social systems have the same properties and so on. Okay, so one obvious place where uncertainty comes into picture that I guess almost everybody knows about, if you have done any experiments ever in your life, is the measurements, right? When you take measurements, no measurement is I guess, data. Measurements give you data, and data without uncertainty for me is the oxymoron. And so whenever you have some measurement, there is uncertainty, inherent uncertainty associated to measurements that you cannot, in some sense, dissociate, right? There is uncertainty because of lack of measurements as well, and we'll come to see why that is, right? Which is then very closely related to partial knowledge. If you only have partial knowledge of a system, that also leads to uncertainty. We'll see examples of this. And so these have been discussed quite a lot in multiple ways, multiple philosophical ways, and so on and so forth. Something that's not so commonly discussed is the interplay between chaos and complexity and uncertainty. And that's what I will try to focus on. Complexity, not quite complications, but anyway, difference between complicated system and complex system is a debate that we can have over dinner. Okay, so the statistics essentially helps you quantify uncertainty. There are various ways. We'll see average, variation, so on and so forth. So I'll come to these parts later in the later half of the talk. So I'll skip this for now. Yeah. Okay. So sources of uncertainty. As I said, measurements. Any measurement has, for me, literally any measurement has uncertainty. How many screens are in this room? Does that question have an uncertainty or not? Why? Okay, so one is actual definition of what you mean by screen, sure. Suppose we have some reasonable understanding of what you mean by screen. Let's accept that. Then is there uncertainty in number of screens here? Suppose this blackboard was actually white, green board was actually white, and somebody with really bad eyesight, actually mine is probably that bad, take off, you stand at the back, or the hall was quite large, and you stand at the back of the hall and take off your glasses. and let's say this tree didn't have the black screen border and so on and so forth, you may not be able to exactly say how many screens there are. You say, oh, maybe there are 2 screens, maybe this is just one big long screen, and so on and so forth. So anyway, so integer quantities which are measured in integers, I think also have uncertainty, usually completely neglected, unfortunately, but anyway, okay. So these things are definitely for sure, right? If you want to measure the length of a table, or different people measure things and so on and so forth, these are the usual measures of uncertainty that are discussed in, say, physics lab and so on and so forth. Okay, temperature measurements have uncertainty associated with thermometers and so on, right? So these are called random. So this is fancy word for what is called random. Comes from, I guess, Spanish, Latin word, aleatory. And so these are random measurement uncertainties. When you take measurements, there are some small variations which you cannot avoid. And the other is possibly lack of measurement. So if you want to give me the average rainfall in Maharashtra, but all you have is 10 rain gauges across, say, 10 different places, that will give you a number of average rainfall, but that may have a very large uncertainty associated to it compared to, let's say, if you have 5,000 rain gauges all over the state of Maharashtra. So why is this has a much larger uncertainty? Basically because of lack of measurements. So not just measurement, but lack of measurements also causes uncertainty. And this is somewhere in between what is called either the aleatory or epistemic. And epistemic is in the realm of when you have partial knowledge of a system, when you do not know something about the system. For example, clouds. If you want to describe the climate, and we simply do not know enough about the dynamics of the clouds, and hence we cannot describe the clouds with sufficient certainty, that will lead to uncertainty in the description of clouds, which is because of partial knowledge of the system, right? So that's one form of, and that is what is called epistemic uncertainty, which is because of we don't know something about a system. Okay, the next two are something that again I think there is not sufficient discussion of this. Chaos, essentially this idea that so to say one prototypical definition of chaos where two initial conditions which are very nearby exponentially diverge away from each other. Amplification of uncertainty is an effect of chaos. And in fact, this actually is the precise definition of chaos in appropriate sense. So I'll skip this part, what is not chaos and what is chaos. Okay, complexity of distinguishing between complexity and chaos and complicated nature. Okay, good, perfect. Thanks. Okay, well, okay. So, and then there is a complexity where typically a complex system, well, it can be chaotic, but also it has multiple scales, multiple different parts, different systems come into picture, and uncertainty in complex systems many times comes from either lack of knowledge, lack of measurements, or partial knowledge of the system. And atmospheric systems are certainly good examples of complex systems. Car engine, I'm not sure, wind, traffic, and so on and so forth. Okay, so just maybe a couple of minutes about the difference between aleatory and epistemic uncertainty, which is that the first one is usually thought of as something that you cannot get rid of. Whatever measurement that you do will always have an uncertainty associated to it. You can reduce it by making the measurements more and more precise, not accurate, precise, but there will always be some uncertainty associated to measurements, and that's why it's typically called irreducible uncertainty. It will always stay. Some uncertainty will always stay. Epistemic, on the other hand, is because of lack of knowledge of a system. Now there is a big debate about whether that can be called irreducible or not. Will we ever be able to know everything about a system that we'll ever want to know or not? Okay, that's a big philosophical debate, but one of the examples I gave, clouds is one good example there. For example, another one would be something like if you want to describe the traffic, but there is not enough knowledge either about the population conditions, the traffic laws, or vehicles, the actual statistic of vehicles and so on and so forth, that will be, so to say, the epistemic uncertainty leading to uncertainty in the traffic flow or uncertain description of the traffic and so on and so forth. Yeah. Okay. There is a right. This is basically okay. This is also called modeling errors, systematic uncertainty, and so on and so forth. I really don't like the word errors while talking about uncertainties, but it's so inherently ingrained in the literature that it's impossible to avoid it. That in many times, uncertainty is also termed as error, but okay, anyway. So the last part, which is the dynamical uncertainty, and what do I mean by dynamical uncertainty? I will come to that in the maybe 3 or 4 more slides or so, roughly. How does dynamics lead to uncertain behavior? Typically chaotic dynamics, right? Okay, so just quickly about how to quantify uncertainty. Of course, so it's a standard way that those came up earlier in the discussion about talking about averages, mean, or the median, or the mode, and so on and so forth. That's one way to quantify certain aspects of a uncertain quantity, and these are typically the averages. Or you can quantify variation in terms of the variance, standard deviation, interquartile range, this and that, and so on and so forth. So these are multiple ways of quantifying the variation of an uncertain quantity. And more generally, or typically pretty much the complete description of the uncertain quantity would be in terms of a probability distribution of that quantity. And how much more we know about the probability distribution tells about how well we know how to quantify the uncertainty. Okay, the other sort of say model of uncertainty is actually physical models. For example, if you take coin tosses and you keep tossing coin, that's typically thought of as a random process, and that is actual physical uncertainty essentially, right? There's good example actually from dynamical systems, which is a double pendulum. I don't know if you have seen enough of the videos of double pendula. If you have not, I highly suggest that spend half an hour watching these videos over and over again. It's highly entertaining. I don't know. That's just my weird way of thinking about entertainment. But anyway, so double pendulum is a good example of highly uncertain system. Just two rods hanging from each other, and the behavior is quite nice. Okay, no two oscillations identical. Sorry? We used to have, I don't know if it's there still. The double pendulum, we had a double pendulum. Yes, I know, but I don't think it's there anymore. I should figure out if it's there. Yeah, I don't think so, but I will have to check now. Yeah, so but just a curious problem. I have not been able to solve it yet. You know how to, you have seen pendulum clocks. Or for example, if you have a battery, then you know a pendulum clock that's run for a long time. Of course, if you just take a pendulum without any power source, it will stop after some time with friction. The same thing happens with a double pendulum. The problem for keeping the pendulum clock, single pendulum clock running for a long time has been solved pretty well. Right? You either actually have the what is that called, the spring clocks or battery clocks. But the pendulum runs, you know exactly how to control it so that it runs until the battery runs out. Double pendulum, that will keep running. That's a curious problem. And you design a double pendulum such that you provide appropriate power source so that you can keep running it for a very long time until the battery runs out, for example. Anyway, just a curious problem. Okay, so that's sort of say physical source of uncertainty. Then global temperature, different people are different. That's and economic development of countries. All of these things are sort of say manifestations of uncertainties in different quantities. Yeah. As I said earlier, of relevance to climate science is spatial, temporal, or actually more importantly, spatio-temporal changes. Right? They should really be thought of as spatio-temporal changes. And that's where one of the very curious problems associated to either studying the Earth, the single Earth that we have, or it comes up in studying well, actually astrophysics on a very, very large scale where we have a single universe, as far as we know. And so how do you generate statistical information from the study of a single system? And that's not a very easy problem to solve. So anyway, I don't know if you thought about this enough, that we have a single Earth. We want to talk about statistics, but we only have one Earth. Okay. Part of the way going, so to say, around this problem is computational models for such systems. And computationally representing uncertainty is one of the ways that we can study even a single system, but multiple times. You can have 1,000 runs of the climate of the Earth, and if that's a reasonably good representation of the climate, then that can provide you with appropriate, so to say, representation of the uncertainty of the climate. Actually, it's a two-way street. Not just quantifying uncertainty by different computational simulations, but rather the way random numbers are generated in a computer, which is called pseudo-random numbers, really depends on the aspects of chaos, the dynamical system aspect that I will talk about later. So how many of you know how uniform random numbers are? So okay, how many of you have used random numbers in whatever language you use? Python, Julia, C, Fortran? Not all of you? Okay, I hope so. I hope all of you have done this sometime. Anyway, so for example, there is some command like uniform or something. How do uniform random numbers get generated? So you run this command, you get a single number which is supposed to be one realization from a uniform distribution from 0 to 1. And you keep it, you do this 1,000 times, you get 1,000 numbers between 0 and 1, such that they are supposed to be draws from the uniform distribution. How are those generated? How are those 1,000 numbers generated? Exactly what I call. Okay. It's not exactly random. There is something about 6 or 7 is specified, and it will just give you those numbers between that. So after some time, it will repeat. So okay. So you are saying it's going to repeat. That is actually true, but on even before the repetition part, there is something else. So you said it's not exactly random. Anything else? That goes partly in the right direction, but not fully. Anybody else? Do you know how the uniform random numbers are actually generated? That's what they're supposed to represent. No, but how do you actually generate the random number? What's the process? What's the algorithm, let's say? Okay, how many of you have studied interval maps? For example, say tent map. You know what is a tent map? You know a logistic map? No? Wait, how many of you know logistic map? The decimal map. Okay, so wait, yeah, okay. Let me not say anything. It is not just that it's not random. In fact, the uniform random numbers are generated by using a deterministic but chaotic dynamical system. So it's not random in any sense of the word. You would think, oh, you just do something random and what you get is, but it's exactly deterministic in the sense that if you know the first random number that you get out of the uniform distribution, then the remaining 1,000 will always turn out to be identical once you fix the first number. So the uniform random numbers that you generate are actually not random, they are exactly deterministic. Completely counterintuitive, but you should, okay, so I guess at some point maybe we can discuss a bit more detail about what exactly is then meant by, and that's why these are not called random numbers, these are in fact called pseudo-random numbers. And there is a difference between deterministic quantities, pseudo-random numbers, and random numbers. So I guess we should at some point discuss this. But anyway, so in fact, include this interplay between dynamical uncertainty and computational randomness is a two-way street. And okay, so sorry, that was somewhat of a deviation, but anyway, useful deviation, I hope. And hopefully you will find it curious enough to try to figure out exactly why is it a deterministic system and why then it is also called random even though it is deterministic. Okay. So conveying the uncertain information is actually another huge problem, and I may or may not get to it. Let's see. In the fourth lecture, if I get to it, I will. Otherwise, I'll skip it. What do you mean by... So if you see a weather forecast that says that there is a 20% chance of rain. Sorry, this should be chance of rain, not change of rain. Okay, actually change also is fine, but anyway. So if you say there is a 20% chance of rain tomorrow, how do you interpret it? How do people interpret it? How is it supposed to be interpreted? Three different questions, but any ideas? How will you interpret it, for example? Suppose I tell you there is a... Okay, so one possible interpretation is a 20% area of what? Of the earth? Hesarghatta? Bangalore? Is it only the ICTS campus? 20% area is usually not actually a good interpretation. Anything else? Any other interpretation? I do not want to talk about multiverses. There is just one single tomorrow. So that's that there's a technical name for this, which is basically the difference between what is called a Bayesian interpretation and frequentist. So if there is a way to repeat an experiment 1,000 times, then one way to interpret a statement like this, 20% chance of rain, is that you do an experiment of having a tomorrow 20,000 times, and you check whether roughly 20%, that is about 200 day of those experiments showed rain, and the remaining 800. In fact, that's actually a wrong interpretation, but anyway, that we can discuss. It is a probability distribution that you should be looking at, and then whether that happens or not. We are not going to be able to generate 200 tomorrows, that's for sure, or 1,000 tomorrows. So that cannot be used in this context. What else? That would be possible if you could repeat the experiment, yes. What else? What else can you do? But tomorrow I'm actually living on ICTS campus. Now what? I'm not living in a simulation. Okay, so then eventually it goes to the idea of trying to get as close a representation of repeatable experiments as possible in a single system. So for example, you think that suppose given a certain set of conditions today, you are saying 20% chance tomorrow, can you find realizations of today which are similar to what exactly it is today in fact, in the past, let's say 100 years, 80 days, or 80 years data set, and see whether tomorrow rained or not 20% of the time. And that's one way. So there are multiple, and this is completely non-trivial task. This is a highly non-trivial interpretation of probabilistic statements and how to actually use them. How to use them goes into the idea of what is called risk, or in general cost functions. So what does it cost to you that this goes wrong or this goes right? If I give you a forecast that is probabilistic, 20% chance of rain, what effect does it have? If you're going to bet on a cricket match, and the cricket match will not happen if it rains, because of which you may lose money, your interpretation of that 20% will be very different from you're just going to sit here in ICTS in a lecture hall and you don't care whether it's raining outside or not. And then your, so to say, use of that forecast will be very different, right? So anyway, it's intimately related to how you use the probabilistic forecast. Okay. So most of the aspects that I discussed here, apart from, I mean, this was just about how to convey information and how to use it, but apart from that, most of the other aspects are really related to either the aleatory or epistemic uncertainty in some sense. So what about dynamical? What about dynamical uncertainty, which I talked about, which I said there is something different, and here is my, so to say, pitch about why it's different. Right? We have all seen these pictures, right? Yeah, anyway. Right? This is the attractor, this is two different trajectories started with two different initial conditions. Initially they look almost identical, then they start looking very different. Standard, textbook. Okay, so from the left picture what we learn is that, and if I could do this for 1,000 different initial conditions and they will still look essentially the same, right? So almost every trajectory looks the same. This you have seen before, right? You take arbitrary initial conditions of the Lorentz attractor, run them for a sufficiently long time, they all start looking like this. On the other hand, the trajectories actually diverge away from each other. However close you are, they start looking completely different from each other within, well, typically Lyapunov time scale, related to what is the Lyapunov exponent. Right? Some Lyapunov time scales, they will start looking completely different. How do you reconcile these two statements? What is the correct interpretation of the first statement in the light of the second statement? So the second one you have seen for sure. Right? That's the definition of chaos, and positive Lyapunov exponents is what lead to this behavior. What about the first statement then? If all trajectories actually diverge, they don't look anything like each other. All the trajectories, if you plot them as function of time, they will look completely different. But then why do we get this?
At some point of time, if things are listed but not at the point of
Okay, so there is no time information here. That's one point, which is that you have completely lost the time information here. So at a time when the red trajectory is here, the blue could be there, and vice versa, and so on and so forth. But since you are looking at it as a sort of a single static picture, they look alike. How do you quantify that? And the answer is on the slide. There is a word here. That's the answer. Nope. That's the second part. I am driving you towards the answer. Ergodicity. Do you know what is ergodicity? Nope. Okay. Essentially, sorry. Oh, this was also discussed 2 days ago. Perfect. Okay, so somebody should tell me what is ergodicity. Represent the system is where all the details lie. So what do you mean by represent the system? Okay, I want answers from this half of the. This half has given enough answers now. So I guess the only thing to decipher now is what is left in the answer that he gave. What is it that, so you take a single trajectory running for a very long time, and let's say the energy of a system averaged over a very long trajectory should describe the system. What do you mean by that? What exactly is left? What's the other part that is left? Computing the average over a trajectory, okay, you already did that. Now you want to compute some other quantity so that they match. What's the other quantity that you need to compute? Sorry? Wait, you're not on this up, sit on this side, but anyway. Anybody else? No? Oh yeah, go ahead. Not quite variation. No? The average with respect to the probability density, or what is called invariant density, invariant distribution of the system. So a statistical average with respect to a probability distribution, in this case the invariant distribution on the attractor, when that equals the time average of a dynamical system, that's what is called a ergodic system, or that is a consequence of ergodicity really, but if and only if consequence. So okay, it's one of the definitions of ergodicity essentially. And why is this now the case? Because what you're seeing is the time object is gone. Effectively what you're seeing is how frequently does a trajectory occupy a given pixel in this picture. So that's basically like a time average. And that's why this statement makes sense, because now you can think of this picture as the time average of the occupancy of that pixel of that dynamical system. And this is a very precise way in which this picture is in fact a statistical average of this dynamics rather than just a random representation. Yeah? Okay, anyway. So chaotic systems are these two properties. In addition to this property, which is that the trajectory diverges from each other, one of the extremely important and defining properties of chaos, in fact, is that it needs to have something along these lines, some property along these lines. That there is an invariant measure or there is a notion of ergodicity that the system satisfies. So all chaotic systems, or all, okay, all. Most useful or whatever typical chaotic systems will have this behavior, which is a, yeah. Okay. So what are the consequences of this? And this is what I mean by uncertainty or now the relation to uncertainty. If you want to make a deterministic prediction using the deterministic dynamics that we have, the uncertainty in the deterministic prediction beyond a certain time scale, typically related to of the order of some fraction of the Lyapunov time scale or some multiple of the Lyapunov time scale, will be useless or it will be impossible. So the uncertainty will be so large that essentially the uncertainty is equal to the variance of the whole system. And in that case, a prediction with that large uncertainty is pretty useless as an actual useful object. Yeah? So because of this chaotic nature, it not only leads to all these nice mathematical properties, it also leads to exponential increase in the uncertainty in the predictions, and controlling that is usually the very difficult aspect. And it also brings in another aspect is that deterministic predictions then lose their value. What you really should be aiming for always are probabilistic predictions. Probabilistic predictions in the sense of instead of giving a prediction in terms of what will be the rainfall tomorrow, what is the probability distribution of rainfall tomorrow, what is the probability distribution of temperature tomorrow, and so on and so forth. So probabilistic forecasts are pretty much the only useful types of forecast for systems where the uncertainty plays a very important role. And in chaotic systems, there simply is no way around, that is, the uncertainty has to play an important role because of the exponential increase, not just in the divergence of trajectories, but also the uncertainty associated to the system. So not the trajectories diverge away exponentially, and a consequence of that, essentially a direct consequence, is the uncertainty increasing exponentially in time. So hence probabilistic forecast absolutely needed. Okay. The solar system uncertainty is an extremely nice topic. I don't know if you have thought about it, if you have read these articles by, well, of course, Poincaré was fascinated by this, but including the recent studies up to about deciding whether the chaotic solar system is chaotic or not. That was part of largest, actually, motivation for understanding chaos more than 100 years ago, right? And the answers are surprisingly recent. People didn't really have a good answer until very, 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 very recently about convincingly saying whether the solar system is uncertain or not. But okay, anyway, that's a separate. Okay, so just a quick recap, and I'll basically stop here. Is that uncertainty and climate change, and hence statistics, are or problems related to climate in general. Actually, not just climate, but all other complex systems is an extremely important topic, and we will particularly touch upon the dynamics of uncertainty in terms of probabilistic, basically how do probability distributions evolve under chaotic systems, and what does that have to do with Lyapunov exponents and Lyapunov vectors eventually. So that's roughly what's coming over the next 2 or 3 lectures. Okay, I'm done for today, but we can discuss later.
Yeah.
Sorry? Sure. Or if you want, you can ask the questions now so that it will help me prepare the talk so that I can then try to answer those questions if I haven't already answered them in the talk. So that's one way to do this. Yeah. Please email me if you have any questions as well. That's perfectly fine. Or you can catch me over tea. And sorry, I have not been present for the tea but anyway, that will get fixed. Yeah.
Randomness have very precise.
Does randomness have a precise definition? Mathematical definition, yes. Relation to actual physical randomness, that's a big philosophical topic. So the purely mathematical definition basically is that any quantity that has uncertainty, that is no single outcome is definite, and that's that's basically in terms of I don't want to try to define things in terms of sigma algebra and so on and so forth, but there is a mathematical way to quantify what I just said. So the standard way to define random variable is to say that, let's say, if you want to think of temperature as a random variable, temperature can take values on the real line, that's a 0 to infinity in Kelvin range, and associate appropriate probability distribution on this interval, on this set, defining the probability distribution for a random variable. Now, where does the randomness come from? That's a, you can go all the way to discuss about quantum mechanics and so on and so forth and whatnot, but for now, practical purposes, the two big sources of randomness essentially are this aleatory or epistemic randomness or uncertainty, and I would like to argue the dynamical aspects of it as well. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, so noise. Yeah, noise is another one of those terms I'm not very comfortable with. I don't understand fully what people mean when they say noise, but anyway. So I think what she asked was that there is a term called random noise, and how does that relate to uncertainty or random error? That's roughly how I interpreted the question. And now random noise. Well, okay. So firstly, I think random noise is I mean, when you say noise, it's always random. See? But I'm not exactly sure what noise will mean. I interpret noise as basically a random variable. A term that is representing some random variable is what I think of as noise. Or noise is a random variable. That's all I think of. But, and then different noises is different types of random variables. White noise, red noise, just difference in the distribution, probability distribution of that variable. So. Noise is always uncertain, always. Yeah. Noise and error are used quite interchangeably, quite commonly, right? Any other questions? And then external sources of noise. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. External source of uncertainty, essentially, and that's one.
It's the whole subject, right?
Yeah. So either the correlations or the different types of noise, white, red noise, this and that, and so on, are from a mathematical viewpoint essentially different distribution functions. White noise will have a specific distribution, and correlation is just one of the statistic of a distribution that measures a specific property of a distribution function. In this case, joint distribution, but anyway. Okay, good. See you tomorrow.